Marcus strolled up to me one last time before his departure, offering a simple nod that spoke volumes. With a steady voice, he said he was off to tackle the wreckage left by her chaos in his life. He ambled away like a battle-worn soldier, defeated but determined. His exit wasn't theatrical, but it screamed finality. As my fingers tangled within the blanket, I felt the weight of my own despair, so heavy it threatened to unravel me at any moment. The sound of a newborn crying somewhere down the hall pierced the air, echoing in my hollow chest, reminding me of the void that had just swerved into my life. I fixated on the chipped paint and the soft glow of lights, counting my breaths like a mantra, hoping to maintain my balance. But grief had other intentions. It swept over me uninvited, like that awkward relative that just doesn't get the hint to leave. My phone buzzed on the tray, the glow revealing a message from Jonathan, the man who should have been right there beside me, holding our stillborn child. Instead, he was across town celebrating with another woman. My husband was gushing over the arrival of their healthy baby boy, painting a picture of happiness like he was launching into his own personal sitcom. My heartbreak hit me like a punch. Losing my child was agonizing, but learning he was casually building a family without me felt like shards of glass breaking inside my chest. Swinging my legs over the bed, I made a silent vow. When I left that hospital, I wouldn't just be Jonathan's defeated wife, I'd rise as a woman determined to thwart the life built on my suffering. With a heavy heart, I stepped into the crisp night, driven more by instinct than intention. The city lights blurred around me, as if even they didn't want to make sense of my turmoil. Without a destination, I craved fresh air that didn't smell like the ashes of loss. Between strides, a stark realization settled in. Jonathan Carter wasn't grieving with me, nor did he ever plan to. Tracking him down was effortless. After all, he always celebrated life's big moments in places that were hard to miss. The restaurant he chose was a beacon of flash, boasting floor-to-ceiling windows and a garish wine display that screamed pretentious. A world filled with laughter and soft jazz engulfed the room, familiar sounds that I felt disconnected from. Spotting him was easy, sitting at the head of a table surrounded by friends and associates, casually leaning towards Sophia Marsh, his new partner. She glowed with the tranquility of someone who had never faced any consequences. His smile, a smile that used to be mine, made my stomach churn as the cheery crowd around them erupted in applause. Watching this play unfold, I found an unsettling calm amid the storm of agony, the kind that comes when pain runs so deep it turns to ice. I didn't storm in to confront them. Anger wouldn't be my tool of destruction. I turned away, choosing to leave their celebration unscathed. Wreaking havoc would require finesse, not wild chaos. That night was not made for rage but strategy, a deliberate silence in the wake of grief's initial strike, where something colder was pooling within me. Returning to my apartment, I felt a chilling calm settle in, one that felt premeditated, a calculated shift from the raw, immediate pain to a deeper determination. I was on the edge of forging a new path, embracing the chill of silence as I learned to strategize instead of lash out. My heart might have been heavy, but I was ready to reclaim my existence in a world that felt reshaped. As I set my hospital bag on the floor, the room enveloped me in darkness. I took a deep breath, soaking in the reality of a life that felt utterly foreign. Shaking off the weight of grief, I wandered over to my desk and powered up my laptop. The screen flickered to life, casting a glow that ignited another version of me, a fierce forensic financial analyst. No longer just a grieving wife, I was ready to dive deeper into the financial labyrinth Jonathan had weaved. Opening our joint portfolio felt like unearthing a treasure trove of hidden secrets. Jonathan always thought he could mask deceit in plain sight, but I had honed my skills over years of complex audits. His overconfidence became his pitfall, as he never imagined I'd meticulously examine the details he believed I would overlook. Trust had evaporated, transforming ordinary figures on the screen into a key to the truth I was determined to uncover. One document led to another, revealing a web of questionable transfers and discreet deposits. The patterns were undeniable, outlining where Jonathan hid funds he never disclosed. Shell companies, offshore accounts, each clue was a breadcrumb he thought he dropped unnoticed. With unwavering hands, I took my time to strategize. I was on a mission, channeling my grief into a relentless pursuit of justice. I was learning that revenge was best served cold over carefully built spreadsheets. Phase 2 of my plan required finesse. I initiated small, measured transfers disguised as routine transactions while subtly adjusting account access to appear like happy accidents. With the precision of someone who had lovingly studied Jonathan's signature over the years, I imitated each stroke flawlessly. What I crafted weren't outright disasters but gentle fractures in the foundation of his empire, imperceptible rumbles that wouldn't register until the seismic shifts began. Leaning back in my chair, I let the silence wrap around me like a warm blanket. Jonathan had built a fortress of wealth and influence, thinking it would shield him from scrutiny. Little did he know that those so-called protections were as fragile as glass in the hands of someone perceptive. With the first layer of his unraveling in motion, I reveled in the strange peace that bubbled within me. I was more formidable than my grief. I was a force of nature. But this was just the beginning. The real chaos would stem from his investors, those who'd always lauded him like a golden child. They placed their trust in his confident facade, oblivious to the nuances lurking behind the numbers. My plan hinged on a simple premise: a whisper of doubt could undo everything. Their fear wasn't of losses but of exposing the vulnerability that allowed them to thrive, and I'd be the one to stir the pot. Drafting that first anonymous email was exhilarating. Each word was meticulously selected, designed to provoke curiosity without coming off as either reckless or vindictive. I fired the note off to Rick Phelps, the venture capitalist known for sniffing out trouble like a bloodhound. I dangled a few inconsistencies, nudging him toward Jonathan's recent dealings and attaching the modified statement that hinted at peril beneath the surface. It wasn't an outright accusation but rather a well-placed invitation for inquiry. And then, the dominoes started to tumble. Rick shared my email with his two partners, and their internal dialogue spiraled as I anticipated. In a sleek conference room with glass walls, I envisioned them poring over spreadsheets, their initial indifference fading into palpable concern and curiosity. They didn't need a smoking gun to panic, merely the seed of suspicion would send them scuttling for the truth. I had ignited a spark, and all it took was a hint to turn their world upside down. Sophia Marsh watched her life unravel, and the culprit was none other than Jonathan Carter. His supposed loyalty was slowly crumbling as whispers of questions began to echo in her mind. I had dropped some breadcrumbs, nudging her to peek at their joint finances. With simple messages, I turned her stability into uncertainty. Doubt melted her unwavering support faster than ice cream on a hot day, and soon Jonathan's fortress began to show its first cracks. That day, my scheming reached new heights. While everyone's attention focused on the unfolding drama, I seized the moment to unlock Liam's iPad. A quick glance at his Face ID did the trick, providing me access to a treasure trove of messages. Suddenly, suspicions transformed into a goldmine of proof, photos, documents, and voice memos that painted Jonathan in less than flattering light. It felt like a front-row seat to a wild reality show, and I was here for all the juicy details. The real kicker was how Sarah had underestimated Liam's carelessness. One evening, while he basked in the blissful ignorance of a hot shower, she stumbled upon his laptop. What she thought was security quickly twisted into chaos as she scrolled through their financial dashboard. The promises of wealth turned into a nightmare, with missing balances and untracked transfers starkly contrasting the image Jonathan had painted. Each click sent her heart into a wild rhythm, revealing a web of deception that made her question everything she'd ever known. Sophia dug deeper with each click, unearthing a world that was not what it seemed. Properties he boasted about debt-free were quietly entangled in financial obligations. That offshore account. It had more withdrawals than she could stomach. With every inconsistency, her affection for Jonathan began to vaporize, replaced with a creeping dread that sent her spiraling toward the realization that safety, not love, was her priority. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a man she didn't truly know. By morning, she made her move. With the precision of a seasoned chess player, she quietly withdrew a portion of their shared savings, creating a barrier between herself and Jonathan's financial disarray. There were no dramatic farewells, just a small bag tucked away behind her closet door, each item an arsenal of her newfound independence. She had mastered Jonathan's tricks, proving she could detach with the same ease he had exhibited for so long. No tears, just an unwavering resolve. When Jonathan finally reached out to me, his panic palpable, I knew the winds of change had shifted dramatically. His confidence was stripped away like layers of an onion, revealing a man desperate for control but unable to grasp it. With a voice that felt raw and strained, he insisted we needed to talk about his financial problems, a plea wrapped in your classic help me please package. But oh, how the tables had turned. I savored this newfound power, chuckling at the irony. I listened as he stumbled through his collapsing empire, a far cry from the armor-clad ruler he once was. I kept my tone steady, equal parts sympathetic and amused, reminding him of the professionals he had once relied on with such vigor. Didn't he once value them more than the person he had left vulnerable and alone? The desperation in his voice was like a symphony playing in the background while the world around us changed, leaving him angry and confused amidst his own downfall. Frustration bubbled beneath Jonathan's surface, barely masking his underlying fear. As he barked demands for answers, clarity, or anything that could salvage his crumbling authority, it became glaringly obvious. He was a ship lost at sea, clueless about the storm brewing around him. When I ended the call, I felt satisfaction rather than closure, reminiscent of the finality he once used to exit my life. In that silence, the weight lifted. He was no longer in charge, and I had nothing left to offer him. Jonathan Carter strutted into banks like he owned the place, quite literally, as it turned out. But on the day he was summoned for an urgent meeting, his shine began to dull. There he was, presumably sitting across from the calm yet formidable senior manager as she slid ominous folders across the glossy table. Her voice dripped with professional precision as she explained the peculiar activity in his accounts. Irregularities I had masterfully orchestrated now danced across neatly printed pages, shining a harsh spotlight on his shady dealings. With each word she uttered, Jonathan's empire felt the tremors of inevitable collapse. When she coldly announced that his accounts were frozen pending investigation, I could almost hear the shattering sound of his first real loss. Desperation clouded him as he scrambled to piece together the chaotic puzzle of his downfall. Meanwhile, in the shadows, I set my next phase in motion, savoring the sweet, just desserts about to unfold. Mila Henderson, PR maven at Carter Holdings, had once been Jonathan's staunchest ally, but every loyalty has its breaking point. When she received the meticulously crafted timeline I had prepared, showing how Jonathan's clandestine transactions could become his undoing, she quickly grasped the gravity of the situation. Responses from Mila didn't trickle back to me, but within an hour, the media caught wind, and the leak became a full-blown tsunami of scandal. News alerts erupted across every screen, each headline slicing through Jonathan's carefully built reputation. Reporters dissected his every move, painting a picture of instability around Carter Holdings while investors who had once admired him began to reconsider. The very same people who had sought his approval were suddenly playing coy, retreating like startled deer from an approaching storm. I reveled in the sight from my apartment, city lights flickering in time with my racing heart. This was no victory dance, just the next necessary crack in his facade. Jonathan's grand penthouse sought to project a sense of invincibility, an intimidating glass fortress, towering over the bustling city below. But that illusion flickered and dimmed the moment he walked into his lobby to find two men in dark suits waiting, folders in hand and authority in their posture. The atmosphere shifted. Residents who'd once admired his status now sensed the tremors of impending doom, their eyes wide with recognition that this was no routine visit. Once they whisked him up to his penthouse, the view that had once reflected his success turned into a stage for his imminent downfall. With an unsettling calmness, the men outlined the reasons for their uninvited arrival: frozen accounts, unpaid debts, and legal actions looming like thunderclouds. Each piece of paper they presented detailed decisions Jonathan couldn't recall making, signatures that felt foreign, and looming responsibilities he'd blissfully ignored. He was a cornered animal, pacing the marble floors, his arrogance stripped away piece by piece as the heavy burden of reality crashed down around him. The movers were in a hurry, expeditiously packing up Jonathan Carter's life while he watched in frustrated silence. They were like seasoned doctors, detached yet efficient as they tossed his curated possessions into cardboard boxes. Priceless memorabilia, plush furniture, and even Sophia's cherished bassinet were reduced to mere labels, inscribed with the same indifferent handwriting that accompanied all evictions. It struck him like a punch. It wasn't just furniture leaving, it was the entire life he had meticulously curated. When the elevator doors slid shut, the echo felt oddly permanent. For Jonathan, it became painfully clear that his opulent lifestyle hadn't just vanished overnight, it had been crumbling slowly, and he was too busy sipping fine whiskey to notice. Now, here he was, clutching a suitcase like it contained the last remains of his dignity, stepping into a one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, a stark contrast to the penthouse that had once been his pride and joy. The new digs echoed with quiet loneliness, almost as if the walls themselves had forgotten how to vibrate with joy. Thin walls, threadbare carpets, and an inexplicably persistent scent of aged paint made it feel more like a timeout than a new beginning. Each morning, with hopeful naivete, Jonathan would power up his laptop, longing for a miracle, only to be met with more rejection emails than he could count. His name had become synonymous with failure, scaring off potential employers and investors in droves. Desperate times called for desperate measures, so he took the one job available that didn't raise an eyebrow at his past, working as an assistant manager at a retail store. The environment was a far cry from corporate board meetings, stripping him of the velvet rope and crowd accolades. Clad in a stiff uniform, Jonathan stocked shelves while dodging glances that were mostly either apathetic or filled with surprise. He worked hard and kept a low profile, hoping for secrecy and obscurity, but fate had other plans. Just as he hid behind his retail duties, Nathan, a former ally from his glamorous days, strolled in one fateful afternoon. The blast of recognition on Nathan's face was like being hit with a wave of icy water. Jonathan handed him the phone charger, keeping his composure, but inside, he could feel his world gently unraveling from that very interaction. The pity in Nathan's eyes crumbled his already fragile pride. He realized he had officially transitioned from a corporate titan to complete irrelevance in the blink of an eye. The quiet moments built a wall around Jonathan now, wrapping him in dull solitude as he processed all that had transpired. I could see it had come to this, the point where he had nowhere left to fall. I sent him a message, knowing he'd show up, as that emptiness would pull him to me like a moth to a dying flame. His former power had completely evaporated, leaving only the burden of confronting his own missteps. At a small, unremarkable coffee shop, the kind that served subpar lattes mixed with a side of nostalgia, I took a seat at the back. I could almost feel the weight of the moment hanging in the air. This was the spot I frequented before chaos entered my life. When the warmth of the coffee embraced my hands, I let it ground me, waiting for the door to swing open, anticipating his arrival and the moment we would unravel the tangled mess of his past. He stepped into my life looking like a ghost of his former self, a man once clothed in tailored suits now draped in wrinkles and despair. Every line on his face whispered tales of lost control, as his slumped shoulders struggled under the weight of his mistakes. Sitting across from me, he fished for sympathy in my expression, but he found none, leaving him to swim in his sea of uncertainty. Clarity had never been his forte. As he stammered out feeble excuses, they crumbled into nothingness before they even reached my ears. He was like a magician whose tricks no longer astonished, and with every breath he drew, the distance between us sharpened to a point. I took a deep breath and delivered the hard truth. His downfall was not destiny but his own doing, a consequence of abandoning everything he had claimed to cherish. I revisited the night I buried our child alone, not to poke at old wounds, but to define the moment our connection splintered. In that statement, there was no victory for me, only a sobering sense of closure that I recognized he was just beginning to grasp. When I stood to leave, I understood he was finally awakening to the stark reality of his loss, and that understanding felt like a necessary end for both of us. Meanwhile, Sophia Marsh was caught in the tide, unaware of the chaotic waves jolting Jonathan's world. My carefully prepared documents exposed the truth of her embezzlement from Jonathan's accounts, leading clients who once adored her work to bolt for the exit. Instantaneously, her carefully crafted image shattered like glass, leaving her reputation in ruins, paralleling Jonathan's crumbling finances. Rick Phelps wasted no time launching a private audit, confirming suspicions I had planted earlier. The report revealed a tangled web of discrepancies that sent shivers down the spines of Jonathan's investors. Where there once was respect for Carter Holdings, there now hung the chilling scent of disaster, and before long, the company was chopped into pieces like some freshly butchered meat, with Jonathan permanently barred from the table. Ma Henderson polished off the investors' malicious appetite by releasing a final statement to the press. In stark honesty, she outlined Jonathan's penchant for deception, stripping him of any heroic narrative. Gone was the public sympathy. In its place was a bitter realization of his ambition's true cost. His once illustrious name became synonymous with deceit, riddled with drama rather than triumph. Standing in that silent cemetery, where my child's spirit rested, I allowed the weight of closure to wash over me like a soothing balm. Jonathan had robbed me time and again, but now I held the last sliver of peace tightly in my grasp. I whispered my truth into the stillness, a promise that he could never touch my life again. As I closed this chapter, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the journey I'd endured. Stories like this remind us that strength can sprout from our deepest wounds. So, join our vibrant community where we embrace truth, justice, and storytelling. Share your thoughts. Let me know which part of this